Mike and Virginia Chevalier are not only diehard Broncos fans, but they have supported DNVR for a long time as DNVR members. They're a husband-wife team with over 15 years of financial services experience. Visit them over at DNVRmortgage.com and enter to win a free DNVR shirt or hat of your choice when you do. Most importantly, get set up with a free consultation to discuss all of your options. That's DNVRmortgage.com. Since your home is likely to be one of your largest assets and your mortgage your largest debt, they believe it's vital to consider your full financial picture when purchasing a home. This includes considering your short-term and long-term planning goals, your investments, and your tax situation. Mike and Virginia will work tirelessly to make sure they find the best loan for your situation. So visit them at DNVRmortgage.com and enter to get a free DNVR shirt or hat when you do. And most importantly, get set up with a free consultation to discuss all of your options. That's Michael Chevalier, NMLS number 1931006, and Virginia Chevalier, NMLS number 1910631.
Number one for the one and only DNVR. Two goes out to Zach, Mace, RK, and the bar. Three for Mr. B in that old trophy case. Number four, we're still waiting for. Bring on the chase. Out on the field, a mile high, Broncos win is our desire. Couple with a breakfast crew and a friend, bleed orange and blue till the bitter end. Come and join us, DNVR. We are DNVR.
Welcome in to a Victory Monday edition of the DNVR Broncos podcast, presented, of course, by MSU Denver Online. Head over to msudenver.edu/online to scope out all they have to offer today. We're talking 750 total classes. There's something for everyone over at msudenver.edu/online. Rigorous and affordable education taught by professors who bring the real world into the classroom. If you're looking to further your education and you want to do it where you can continue living your life, there's no better place to do it than msudenver.edu/online.
My boys, what's up? Happy Victory Monday. The sun is shining and the Broncos are back on the winning train.
Yeah, back on the winning train, avoiding the cellar in the division, staying alive in the playoff race, keeping spirits around Drew Lock alive. I don't think you can overstate just how big this win was for the Broncos last night.
Well, and not only did they avoid the cellar in the AFC West, guys, they also avoided becoming sellers in the AFC West, as the Chargers are now dealing some players because they lost the game. They couldn't stop that final play of the game. Now they're selling some of their players. The Broncos, there's going to be no selling here in Denver.
Now, what's interesting is the guy they're selling, according to reports, is Desmond King, and that's somebody they really could have used last night, especially in the fourth quarter. And so it was fascinating that they put him on the shelf for that game. Obviously it's a scenario where maybe he's already asked for a trade and they know they're trading him, so they didn't want to expose him to injury. But it's kind of fascinating how that came together and how that was another little thing that helped the Chargers' efforts unravel.
I would advise against what the Chargers are doing right now. Justin Herbert has been awesome, and he just keeps losing. And if I were the Chargers, I would be worried about, the effects that can have on a quarterback. You look at a guy like Carson Wentz, who I believe is as talented as they come in the NFL. Now, maybe not as talented as they come, but very clearly can cut it in the NFL as a quarterback. He's a playmaker. He has their arm. He can make all the throws. And he has developed a ton of bad habits because he feels like he has to do everything for the team. And I don't like the idea of the Chargers making their roster worse and making Justin Herbert feel like he has to do even more than he's already doing. And I think he could develop some bad habits just based on, the idea of, man, if we're going to win, I really have to carry the load now. So I realize that their playoff hopes are pretty shot, and they obviously don't plan on re-signing Desmond King and all those things, but I would just caution them from from kind of punting on this season and saying, hey, we're going to use the season just to develop Justin Herbert. Because if what happens in all of these games continues happening, I think he could develop some bad habits. But that's just a side tangent.
That's actually not a bad point, though, because if you're Justin Herbert, you're waking up this morning, you just had a 4th consecutive 3-touchdown game. You're wondering, what do I have to do here?
Yeah, exactly. But Justin Herbert is now 0-1 against the Denver Broncos. He's 0-1 in his battles against Drew Lock. And man, Justin Herbert dominated the first 2.5 quarters of that game. And then Drew said, not on my watch, buddy. I'm taking over, and then dominated the second half after he threw that interception. The Broncos went on to the magnificent comeback, which they're really good at against the Chargers, guys. And the last time that the Broncos overcame 21-plus point deficit to beat the Chargers, they went on to win their next 10 straight and finish first in the AFC. So who knows? Who knows?
Who knows indeed. And, there's a lot of things you can talk about with this game. And a lot of times in the media, I think we get too caught up in quarterbacks. But it's very obvious that this game, when you zoom out, the further you zoom out, the more this game becomes about Drew Lock. It was looking so bad for Drew. And there was going to be people saying it's over. They already were, actually. And there's going to be people saying, tank for Justin Fields. And there's going to be all sorts of stuff going on. And then Drew found the mojo. He somehow got it back. Philip Lindsay, with that run, I think really, really helped. And now it's all up to Drew to show that wasn't a fluke. That was more him positively regressing to the mean than it was a fluky, Charger choke that he just happened to be on the right side of. And moving forward, I think this is so interesting of a conversation to have this week, because to me, it's going to be very obvious pretty quickly whether or not there was an actual, flipping of the switch that happened last night. Now, it doesn't mean it's the beginning or the end for Drew Lock based on what happens in the first quarter against the Falcons. But if he goes out there and looks like the quarterback that we thought he was coming into the season in the first quarter against the Falcons, and of course, sustains that throughout the game, I think that you're going to look back and say, wow, that really was the moment where Drew Lock got his swagger back. Because as I look back on the game and I'm watching the highlights, and even after Drew throws the touchdown to Deshaun Hamilton, he kind of looks over at the sideline and shrugs and, throws the backpack on, I'm like, wow, we haven't seen any of that from Drew this year. And I think I had just forgot, we're so caught up in evaluating Drew here, there, and the other thing. And I hadn't realized that you hadn't seen Drew really be himself on the field this year. So that, as much as anything to me, was like, oh, okay, maybe this was a moment where he felt it. Like Philip Lindsay said after he scored his touchdown, I knew we were going to win. And I wonder if Drew kind of felt that energy, illuminating off of Phil and soaked it up a little bit, and then just decided to go out there and be himself and have fun. So, I'm not saying the first quarter of the Falcons game is make or break for Drew Lock, but I'm saying we're going to learn really quickly if that was what got him his mojo back.
How about the little finger guns that he had? Super subtle little pew pew after that touchdown, man. I love it. And you're right, Ryan. We haven't seen a fun, excited Drew Lock in so long. That's what was so fun about last year, especially in the Houston game when he took off, really embraced Buzz Lightyear. And that was just something so fun for Broncos fans to get behind. But it's going to be very clear, I think, these next couple of games, whether he's turned a corner or whether it was kind of a fluke in the second half. Because, guys, in that first quarter, Drew Lock looked so uncomfortable in about every way a quarterback could look uncomfortable. He didn't look comfortable with the plays. He didn't look like he knew which way he was supposed to be looking. He didn't look like he could scan the field. He didn't know if he should run, if he shouldn't run when there was pressure. It was as bad as you could look at as a quarterback, simply put. And then again, tremendous in the second half. We'll see maybe. I think we'll see against the Falcons. Did Pat Shurmur figure out how to call a game for Drew Lock? Did he figure out in that second half, okay, here's what Drew Lock likes? Or was it more so of the Chargers charging and the Chargers playing kind of a prevent defense more so, letting Drew get comfortable, and then Drew took off with that? I think you're right, Ryan. I think it's going to be very clear. And I think one of the huge things that we'll see is, are Pat Shurmur and Drew Lock on the same page now?
Yeah, the one thing, though, I don't think it's going to be clear in the first quarter, one way or the other. I think, actually, if there's a lesson from yesterday's game, it's that you got to let the entire game play out here for Drew Lock.
And that's one. I think it's the next few games.
Yeah, but I would even say, like in this game, it wouldn't surprise me if they do come, if instead of being uber aggressive as they were in the fourth quarter when they're behind, that maybe it's somewhere in between where they were in the first half yesterday and where they got to at the end of the game. Now, what I'd like to see them do is mix in a few up-tempo series, maybe go no huddle at times when you don't have to go no huddle. I think that's the sort of thing that could make Drew a little more comfortable. But I think looking at next week's game, if there's an early pick or there are early struggles from the offense, don't be so quick to say, well, okay, he didn't carry it over. This is, let the game play out, because it's another game against another team that frankly has trouble finishing, and that could lead to a performance for Drew Lock next week with an arc similar to the one that he had yesterday.
For what it's worth, I'm not saying that they have to go out and score 14 points in the first quarter against the Falcons. I'm mostly talking about just what I see based on Drew Lock's mannerisms, based on the look in his eyes. I mean, that sounds crazy, but when you look back on the first two quarters of last night's game, the look in his eyes was not good during the first half. He looked puzzled. And so if he goes out and throws a pick in the first quarter, I might not even say that's a bad thing. I want to see him trying to make throws that he thinks he can make, because you look back on the first half of last night's game, yesterday's game, he wasn't trying to make throws in tight windows. He just, he was taking what the defense was giving him, which I thought was funny because everyone was crushing him for being too aggressive before. Then everyone's crushing him for taking checkdowns. And I think, to me, that's just part of the maturation process of a young quarterback. So he was too aggressive. Then they said, hey, we want you to go through your progressions more. So he went through his progressions. You guys know what the last progression is? The check down. And so he overcorrected. Now he has to find the middle. Now he kind of has to find the middle ground. I just want to see him be aggressive. I want to see him be Drew Lock. Drew Lock is a gunslinger. Drew Lock is a guy who, wants to get out of the pocket and make a big play downfield. I just want to see him be Drew. It doesn't necessarily mean they have to be great in the first quarter. I just want to see him play with swagger and confidence.
I think it's going to be so obvious, because he looked so uncomfortable back there, guys, in the first half. Even if the Broncos didn't win last night, even if the Broncos didn't even come close to that final touchdown, let's say Drew has 2 touchdowns, 120 yards, still a very good fourth quarter, but they don't win the game, we would be saying a similar thing. Okay, Drew had a lot of momentum in the second half of that game. Let's see if he can carry it forward. He looked so much better in that fourth quarter and second half after he threw that pick. We'd be saying the same thing. So again, yeah, he doesn't have to go out and throw 4 touchdowns, no picks against the Falcons, but I think we will know pretty darn early in the game. And of course, you're not going to judge him and write the final book on him in that first quarter, that first half against the Falcons. But if he goes out and looks comfortable all game, I think it's going to be very good for the Broncos. And I think we're going to know, okay, a page was turned here for Drew and Pat Shurmur. But if not, then it's, we're going to see a lot more ups and downs for this Broncos offense, which, again, was expected.
You wonder what Raheem Morris is going to try to dial up as well. Is he going to maybe attempt to create some confusion? Because if you want to kind of create that look on Drew in Drew Lock's eyes that you're talking about, RK, then you're going to have to disguise some coverages, and that's something that over the years Raheem Morris's defenses have done. He's he's a little bit down the line from the old Tampa 2, but he will use that, and that's going to try to catch him off guard. So I imagine Drew Lock's going to see some coverages that maybe he hasn't seen before, and they're going to try to force some mistakes, and then it's going to be up to Drew Lock to take what's there and make sure. And if what's there is the 9 ball to Tim Patrick, and I think it's going to help having Patrick back next week if he's there, then go ahead and take it, because sometimes taking what's there does mean being aggressive.
Yeah, one thing I learned last night, which I continue having to learn this lesson every single time the Broncos play the Chargers, is Joey Bosa is one of the more underappreciated stars in the NFL. I don't think he gets enough publicity. And when he is on the field, they can get pressure with 4. And as we know, that is the number one way to stop a quarterback, is to get pressure with 4 men up front. Bosa, he doesn't have to get sacks. He is disruptive on damn near every single play. And I just don't think he gets enough credit for that. I think, and I'm guilty of this, like going into the game, I just don't think I said Joey Bosa's name enough. I think it should be the number one thing you say anytime you play the Chargers as well. You're going to have to deal with Joey Bosa just disrupting everything you want to do up front. So when he came out of the game, it made a massive difference. And, Drew Lock detractors are going to try and use that as a reason why that, the comeback was fluky. To me, it's just more about what Drew Lock can do when he actually has a clean pocket and he's actually protected back there. And yes, it absolutely helped him that happened because Joey Bosa went out of the game. But if you can protect Drew, he's going to be able to make plays in that pocket. It's just when you look back on the disruption that Bosa caused early in the game is incredible. They just, they're just flushing out the pocket almost every play.
Yeah, and a way to help that is get Drew on the run away from those disruptive pass rushers. Next time you play the Chargers, have him rolling away from Joey Bosa. Anytime you play a really good pass rusher, help Drew out with that, Pat. And Drew said after the game on that last touchdown pass, just how comfortable he is being on the move. So do that. Let's see if Pat Shurmur is on the same page with Drew this coming week by just getting him on the move, because Drew in the first half yesterday was very uncomfortable scanning the whole field. He didn't like to do it, and he wasn't successful when he did it. So help him. Instead of every play just dropping back and having him scan the whole field, help him really break it down so he's only looking at half the field sometimes.
It would help. I mean, I know Pat Shurmur definitely wants Drew Lock to be able to see the entire field, but kind of distill it down. One of the reasons why I like the play call at the end for the game-winning touchdown is A, you took advantage of Drew Lock's mobility, got him outside the pocket, and gave him the option of running if it was there. B, on that key play, you kind of distilled the focus down to just that side of the field and having guys coming in at various levels. So it was the kind of thing that a young quarterback who's still learning how to read the entire field was able to handle and make a confident decision like he did.
I also have to say, guys, at the last drive of that game, I was thinking and hoping that it didn't, but that the Chargers were going to end the game with the sack. And Drew and the offensive line did a great job. And I know people were losing their mind with all the checkdowns to Melvin Gordon. But the Broncos played it right. All they needed was 1 second left to get that final playoff, and that's what they had.
And the other thing that was kind of cool about that, the checkdowns, I know drove everyone crazy, and you did get an assist from the PI call there in the end zone. But what you were also doing was making sure the Chargers didn't have another chance. And I think to some degree that may have factored into the Broncos wanting to kind of dink and dunk their way down the field, starting with the beginning of that drive with 2.5 minutes to go, because even in the fourth quarter, even though the Chargers hadn't had touchdowns, they'd driven to field goals both times. They'd had a lot of success throughout the game, and I wonder if that wasn't kind of on the minds of Pat Shurmur and Vic Fangio when that drive started. Is all right, let's try to get down the field, but let's make sure that we're scoring where we don't give Justin Herbert much of a chance.
No way, I don't think so. I don't think that's what happened, man. And
you don't think they were playing 4D chess? Come on.
No, I don't think so. But as Tanner points out, Fangio with very good clock management at the end of the game. He was put in a similar situation as he was with the Titans, although there was a little more time left, and he played it differently, and credit to him. There was enough time left. There was 1 second left on the clock, and that's all the Broncos needed at the end. But Vic called his timeouts properly when the Chargers were down there about to kick a field goal.
Yep.
So you mentioned the pass interference. I just wanted to get your guys' opinions on this because Brandon Stokely has been very vocal that he thinks that it was a bad call on the pass interference. I personally couldn't disagree more. I thought it was a very clear and obvious pass interference call. I don't even think the ref had to make a difficult decision in any way, shape, or form. Just curious, Zach and Mace, where you guys stand on this.
Yeah, I think it was the right call on that pass interference. However, I don't think the Chargers needed to do that. I don't think that would have been a completion. Yeah. So, I think it was the right call. But man, just the Chargers chargering there since they didn't need to.
Yeah, and the thing about it is it is to some degree how it looks, and what happens is there when you've got Fackus and he's dropping back against Albert O, but his head is turned away from the quarterback. That's the thing. You are not going to get that call in your favor when you are locked in and you're staring at the guy who has gotten a half step past you, and your instinct is not making him look back to the quarterback. So it's one of those things where there are sometimes you have contact and you can sell it and not get the PI, but the way he was positioned in that situation, and the way he's also and you can even see him kind of making the push to Albert O and getting him right here on the chest, they're going to call that 95 times out of 100. I gotta disagree with Stoke on this one.
Yeah, he got his whole body in Albert Okwuegbunam. Like, it wasn't even just like, he reached his arm out or anything. If you watch the frame by frame, at one point, like from shoulder to toe is all touching Albert Okwuegbunam. So I thought that was really obvious. And one of our guy D-Line said he even went on to a Chargers message board just to see if they were complaining about the flag, and like only one person on there said like it might have been questionable. No one was really complaining about it too much. So I don't even think it was a close call. One other thing, Drew Lock was very vocal. You saw a video tweeted out from the Broncos, and there's some stories floating around of Drew making sure that he let the fans who were booing or the fans who were, yelling personal insult at him during the game know that, be a little more patient next time. What do you guys think of that?
I don't know. The Broncos were awful in the first half. Drew was terrible in the first half, but also the running game was awful, guys. They had 2 yards. They were averaging 0.25 yards per carry in the first half. That's awful. And you know what? You have fans there so that they can enjoy the game. They can express their emotions. There's going to be booing. And let me tell you guys, there was a lot of booing. I don't remember being at a game where there were so many boos at so many different times of the game. And I don't know how much you guys were able to hear over the broadcast, since there were only 5,700 fans there, but it was all the time. Once the boos started, they did not stop for a long time. You were playing bad, If this was the 2013 Broncos, when they were only beating the Jaguars by 2 points and they got booed off the field at halftime, that was ridiculous because the Broncos were winning the game. The Broncos were getting killed by a bad team in the Chargers. So I thought the boos were warranted. And then you know what? They shouldn't have been booed off the field at the end of the game because of their comeback, and they weren't, So I think that players, and I think we're going to start seeing this more, is no one believes in us. It's you against, well, you guys haven't been good. We're coming around to you once you start being good. So I think we're going to get more and more of that.
Well, consider what had happened in the previous 6+ quarters. You'd been out, when you were down 24-3, you'd been outscored 67-19. If we want to extrapolate things further, I mean, you'd gone for Drew Lock. I mean, literally the offense had gone 16 quarters and only scored 4 touchdowns. So you're literally averaging about 1 touchdown per 60 minutes. You can't blame anybody for being frustrated. And it was not just about Drew Lock and the offense at that point. We could see it in the tenor of comments leading up to this game, guys. It felt like a lot of frustration over the last few years was coming to a head about watching what appeared to be yet another stagnant, inert offense. And yeah, you can't blame anybody for booing. And I can assure you, Zach, it came through loud and clear on the television. You heard it. You heard quite a bit of it. It was at the point where I thought, gosh, are they actually piping those in? Nope, because they wouldn't pipe in boos. I mean, those were legit.
So I think you guys are spot on in what you're saying. Fans can boo. I'm not here to talk about what fans should or shouldn't do, except for one thing. Less fans in the stadium means what you are saying, not just the noises you're making, but what you are saying towards the players, they can hear you. And those are humans that you're yelling things at. And if you are yelling insults and terrible things and calling people names from behind the bench, then you know what? If you could dish it out, you got to be able to take it too. And so I believe the players and anyone had any right to say, what are you doing now? What's going on now? 2 minutes ago, I was a bleep and bleep. Now you love me. Just think a little more next time before you yell something like that at a human.
What's interesting is that what Drew had was a less saucy version of Jake Plummer back in 2004. And it was kind of similar to what you're saying. It was actually, it was one kind of particular comment, one harsh fan that was sitting behind the bench and was getting on him. And that led to him doing and then the bird, which I'm conveniently doing off camera. So we keep this thing G-rated, but Drew's got some of that chip on the shoulder. Yeah, I hear you when you're razzing me thing that Jake Plummer has. And it's funny, people have been making like a Jay Cutler comparison, other comparisons. Maybe Jake Plummer is the comp for Drew in a lot of ways, in terms of swagger, in terms of attitude, and yes, in terms of kind of inconsistency, that when he plays at a high level, it can be terrific. But then occasionally there's going to be moments where it looks really bad.
So are we calling him Drew the Snake now?
I don't think that has.
It doesn't work, man. But nice try.
What I'll say here is, I want my quarterback to have that in them. I want them to have a little a-hole in them. I want them to want to whether it's at fans or opposing fans. I want them to want to prove people wrong and then let them know about it afterwards. That's just a characteristic that I like. I wrote that story about Drew Lock the day after he was drafted about how, one of the best games of his high school career was in a really hostile environment. And the fans were just yelling at him before the game. And then, he makes his first three from deep and he turns around and looks at the fans and they're getting on him even more. And he uses that as fuel and he goes and he just gets hotter and hotter and hotter. And he's just, he's going back and forth with the crowd the whole night. You would prefer that's more the case, is you're going back and forth with the opposing crowd. But I like the fact that Drew has it in him where when someone's yelling at him and getting on him, it kind of turns on an extra little notch for him. And that might be some vindication for the fans who were booing last night. The fact that was present in Drew's mind as he's walking off the field. And it's not like the thing that was caught on video, it was very tame. He just looked at them and said, hey, next time, be a little more patient before you start booing us. I thought that was fun. And I think the fans can say, you know what, we booed them into playing harder. And so that part, I don't mind, but I do mind just there's 5,700 people there. You're sitting behind the bench. Be cognizant of what you're yelling at fellow human people.
Well, I don't even think if there's 5,700 people that matters. I think booing is way different than, saying really mean things to people. So I'm there with you, Ryan. I think there's a big difference in booing and saying mean things.
Well, yeah, no, 100%.
Right.
But again,
Ryan, first of all, before you go on, I got to say this. You are familiar enough with the Philadelphia sports culture to know about corrective booing. I had a friend from Philly who would make that point. I would ask him, why do you guys boo so often. He said, we care and we are trying to make the player or make the team better. We believe in corrective booing. And I would rather see that than hear nothing. The worst sound, Zach, yesterday would have been just people sitting there. And that was something that kind of you saw in the Tampa Bay game last month, when the first game where there were fans there and it was getting bad and there was a little bit of booing, but people were just kind of sitting there limply in the stands, letting it happen. That's apathy. That's something you don't want to hear. I would rather hear booing. I want to know people care.
Yeah, absolutely. There's nothing wrong with caring. Nothing wrong with caring. There's nothing wrong with booing. I really don't think. I personally don't boo my squad. But that's just a personal choice. I'm not here to tell anyone, what the correct way to be a fan. Unless you're giving out, you're yelling mean things at people. That's just about being the correct way to be a human. All right. Anything else you guys want to touch on in terms of how, the headline here, how Drew Lock can prove that this week wasn't a fluke? Is there anything specifically that you want to look for as they go into the Falcons game next week?
You're probably going to hear me say this the next 3 weeks, but I really believe these 4 weeks, after these 4 weeks, including like yesterday, we're going to know Drew Lock. What are the chances that these next 3 games he comes out and looks terrible in one half and then has an epic comeback in the second half? Odds aren't very solid that that's going to happen. And if so, well, then you just have a winner in Drew Lock. So we'll know that about him. But I really do think in these next 3 games against average teams, a little below average, little above average, we're going to see how Drew, if he continues to play consistent, going in a positive direction, if he has a ton of ups and downs, or if we see more of the first half Drew throughout entire games. And you know what? Right now, I'm riding the high because I believe in Drew. And I'm going to ride on the high of the second half and think that he's going to carry this in a positive direction.
I'll say also this. If things aren't working, and normally I'll be like, okay, if you believe in your game plan, stick with it. But if you see something that's not working, if you see that look in his eyes that RK spoke of, if you see him struggling with certain kinds of coverages, then change it up sooner. If you feel like that the offense is languishing, go up tempo, say first drive of the second quarter. And I would say that in general, the willingness to gear shift if something's not there, that's something that applies to the entire offense. So yeah, if you're getting less than optimal results from Melvin Gordon, put Phil out there. And if Phil is averaging, forget about 13.8 yards per carry. If Phil is averaging 6 yards a carry, get him out there more. So I want to see some tactical nimbleness earlier rather than when you're down 24-3 and you finally get desperate and you finally start winging it around. I want to see that a little bit sooner, because if AJ Boye is out next week, guys, you are talking about a potential issue matchup-wise going up against Calvin Ridley and, of course, the great Julio Jones. So you may need to put up another 31 points to win this game.
Last thing before we move on to the comment section and end the live here. Zach, I didn't get a chance to ask you last night. The Broncos did what you talked about, which was not only making Albert Okwuegbunam the third read, but hardly using him at all in the first 3 quarters of the game. What did you think of it?
And it worked. Look at that. He has a touchdown.
It worked in making Drew Lock's life way more difficult.
You used him when you need to use him. You used him in the red zone. What did he have? 3 targets, and 2 of them were in the end zone. 1 of them led to a touchdown, and 1 of them was a touchdown. So there you go, guys. I do love how much the Broncos used threw the ball to Noah Fant and Jerry Jeudy, though. And obviously, Deshaun came up and made plays. That's what I really wanted. It wasn't don't use Albert O. It was you have to get your 2 first-round weapons involved in the game, and they did that.
The other thing also, I wonder if they would have gone to him as much down the stretch if Nick Vannett had not been hurt with the foot injury. We'll probably get some more clarity on that today or tomorrow. But this might have forced them into doing something that they probably should do. Now, if the injury to Andrew Beck, the injury to Nick Vannett forces you to use Albert O more often, He's got to step up as a blocker if he wants to get out there for more sets than just the occasional look. And so I really hope that he improves in that area, because I do believe strongly, even though Pat Shermer loves his 3 wide, that the future of this offense is in 2 tight end packages with Noah Fant and Albert Okwuegbunam.
I hope Nick Vannett is okay, and this foot injury just sidelined him a bit for yesterday's game. But if he's healthy, and I hope he is, Albert O is your second tight end. Let's make that very, very clear. That's how it should be, no matter who else is healthy, who else isn't healthy. He should be your second tight end, because he should be on the field often with Noah Fant.
Yeah, at the very least, he should be out there on third downs and obvious passing downs, because he's very clearly the second best, if not, he might be able to eventually make the argument he's the best pass catching. Not quite yet, but I think his ceiling is equal. It's just as high as Noah Fant, to be honest. When it comes to just being a weapon out there on the field, Noah already a much, much better blocker, and will continue probably to be a much better blocker. And right now, still a better receiving option. But they're very similar in the sense that they are huge and fast. And I think Drew Lock's chemistry with Albert O helps his ceiling quite a bit. So get him out there especially when you're in obvious passing situations.
Right now, literally the difference between the two of them is that Noah Fant is a willing blocker and was asked to do it at Iowa, because if you don't block, you don't play. And Albert O at Mizzou, it was just get in space and get open. So Noah just was starting at a much higher level blocking wise, even though it's not the most effective part of his game, just a much higher level than Albert Okwuegbunam was when he came in.
Yeah. All right, we are going to move on to the podcast side of things. Anyone who's watching on YouTube, we'd love if you hit us with a like on this video, hit us with a subscribe. We'd also love if you subscribe to the podcast, and you can hear the full thing when you head over to any place that you listen to podcasts and download DNVR Broncos. But for now, we're jumping over to the podcast side of things. Appreciate you guys for tuning in.